Hi, everybody. This is Jackie DeShannon, and you're listening to Tony Peters on Icon Fetch.
Welcome to Icon Fetch. I am Tony Peters. Now, Chris Carter, you might say, is a rather busy person. He hosts Breakfast with the Beatles. It's America's longest-running Beatles show. It airs Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern on Sirius Radio, as well as on Sundays on the FM dial in Southern California. But that's not all. He also serves up Chris Carter's British Invasion on Little Steven's Underground Garage Tunnel on Saturdays and Sundays. So you might say he's busy 8 days a week. Okay.
You stole my line.
I know I did, man. I'm sorry.
Be my line.
I know. What am I going to do here? Anyway, we welcome to the program Chris Carter. How are you, man?
Fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing well. And the other thing I was going to say, reading off the bio, you used to own a record store. That's pretty cool. I'm sure you got a lot of stories there. And you used to play bass in a pretty cool band that I happen to be familiar with, Dramarama. That was that. So, yeah, kind of a interesting past indeed, right?
Yeah, you could say that, I guess.
Well, what's interesting is I'm a big music guy as well as you are. And, you go through life, people are like, oh, yeah, that guy's a real big music guy. And then they go, well, what's your favorite band? And you go, the Beatles. And they go, well, that's everybody's favorite band.
Yeah, right? I mean, it doesn't matter who it's like I always say with Spinal Tap, no matter what, genre of music, you're into. If it's heavy metal, you can go on a reggae band's bus and they have Spinal Tap on, you know.
Right.
It's universal, and that's the way it is with the Beatles,
Exactly.
It's just doesn't matter what band you're in, the guys in Metallica like the Beatles.
Right, exactly. It's
universal.
Matter. Right, exactly. So your Beatles journey, were you old enough to see the Beatles on Ed Sullivan? Or no?
I was sleeping when the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan show. I was taking a nap because I was just, 3.5.
I hear you, right.
But, I was affected in other ways by the Beatles. I'm one of those guys that didn't see them on the Ed Sullivan show, yet still a fan.
Right. Fantastic. So if you flash forward, we can talk about some of your other stuff in the past, but you have been the host of this really long-running Breakfast with the Beatles show. Now, you have been the host of this for 19 years, but it dates way before that, right?
Yeah, it started in 1983 on a radio station called KMET in Los Angeles. And the host was Deirdre O'Donoghue, and she did it for, up until about 2001, and she unfortunately passed away. Didn't show up to the station one morning. Everybody was tuning in to hear Breakfast with the Beatles, and there was no disc jockey. And she sadly passed away. And, your first gut reaction is, oh, my God, that's so sad, that's awful, poor Deirdre, we still listen to her every Sunday. And then your second reaction is, oh my God, what's going to happen to the show,
Right.
That show's still going to go on. So they had a contest. It was kind of a weird radio thing. They had 5 different hosts rotate throughout the summer, and then at the end in September they had a vote, and then whoever got voted would be the new host of Breakfast with the Beatles. So that's how I got the job. I was voted in by the listeners. So,
nice. Well, yeah. It's interesting because I know firsthand Beatles fans are fairly a particular bunch. So if you're pleasing them, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, well, that's the thing you have to also learn now that I'm doing it Monday through Fridays on the Beatles channel. On Sirius XM, you have to be careful because you're talking to, just like you say, you're talking to the hardest core Beatle fan in the world, and at the same time, you're talking to somebody who might just have the Beatles one album as their only Beatles album,
sure.
Right? So you don't want to, you don't want to talk down to that one segment of the audience, and you don't want to, patronize the other. So you have to really walk a fine line and be informative, give the information, but not come off like some kind of a know-it-all. So the way I always approach that is humor, because the Beatles were like the funniest guys in the world. Everything was a joke to the Beatles. Sarcasm, was a big part of their whole lifestyle. So, we keep humor front and center and not try to get too serious about it, because after all, it's just rock and roll by 4 guys. We try not to worship too hard, you know,
right.
because
Well, I mean,
they wouldn't go for that either. They were
agree.
the first ones to tell you.
Yeah,
you know?
I think sometime in the CD era, it seemed like we got really, really protective of the Beatles. You know, like they were the last ones to get on iTunes or whatever. You know what I mean? Like there was all this kind of real, and yet if you go and you listen to the Beatles Christmas singles that they did for their fan club, that's some serious evidence that those guys were very funny people.
Exactly. And, you know, John Lennon couldn't even take a picture without making a face first, you know.
Right.
That was just the way they were. And if you also look into their history, you know, they very rarely talked about their music, you know. They didn't do interviews where they would really get into their music, like, oh, we put these strings here and then they were very vague about that, which also made it special, you know. They weren't too into letting the cat out of the bag, so to speak, you know, of how they arrived at what they were doing, you know, which is also quite clever of them.
Sure, absolutely. Now, you've been hosting this show for 19 years, and one might say, how do you keep it fresh? I mean, especially, and like, how long have you been doing the Sirius show, Monday through Friday, then?
The Beatles channel began, we had our 3-year anniversary in May.
Yeah, so that's ramping things up, going from once a week to, you know, pretty much, like you said,
over
8 days.
300 a year, picking 60 songs every day.
Right.
We handpick the show every day. It's not just like some generated computer playlist that I read off of. You know, that's the last thing we do.
Right.
Every show is put together depending on that day. And what keeps it fresh is, you know, like, for instance, what happened on August 1st? Oh, yeah, the concert for Bangladesh took place at Madison Square Garden in 1971.
Nice.
That gives me a whole springboard.
Sure.
I can do a live show on this. You just look, sometimes it has nothing to do with the date. You know, sometimes we'll just do a show called The Songs You Know and Love, just slightly different. And then for 3 hours, you get all these Beatles songs you know and love, but different versions of them, not one official release, you know, just wacky, cool, different versions, and people just love that, you know?
Right.
And then we have birthdays, and we have guests, so it's always fresh.
Yeah, well, no, that's good. And, I mean, I also understand you really like to, you know, tell stories and talk about trivia, and, I mean, it's almost endless with the Beatles, isn't it?
It is. And, like I said, there were so many, like, you pick a date, but then, you know, you go through the whole history. There's what happened August 1st in 1964, 65, 66. You can always come up with something. And then if it was really a dead day, you know, maybe they were recording this day. Oh, 50 years ago today, John and Paul were doing the Ballad of John and Yoko. It just brings it, you know, it puts it in perspective. So then if you're listening to a song you've heard 1,000,000 times, it's nice to have a little setup and say, hey, this is just 2 Beatles playing on this one. John and Paul recorded 50 years ago today at EMI. Then it puts it in perspective. They're like, wow, 50 years ago, that's what those guys were doing. Okay, wow. You know, it makes it interesting.
Right, absolutely.
So,
yeah.
And you don't want to talk too much, you know, just a minute or so between sets. You know, you don't want to overdo it. People tune in to hear the Beatles, you know.
Right.
You're just their little tour guide, that's all.
Sure, absolutely. So let me ask you this. I mean, being the host of this longest-running Beatles show in America kind of thing, does it, does it come with its perks as far as, like, getting access to actual Beatles and, and surrounding people around the Beatles kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially now because of, you know, the Beatles channel, I had the wonderfully pleasing opportunity to interview 2 Beatles in the last 3 weeks.
Wow.
I had Paul McCartney actually called my house, the same line you called on.
Nice.
And, on his birthday. And we did 20 minutes on his birthday on the morning of his birthday on the Beatles channel. And then I just interviewed Ringo on his birthday.
Nice.
Those birthdays come together, so I usually get lucky. And what's great about that is, you know, those guys, you know, they know the show, and they know me, and that's like something if you told me when I was a little boy, you know, oh, yeah, the Beatles would know your name. One of them would call your, well, actually, I've actually had 2 Beatles call my house.
Right.
So, you know, and that's not like a bragging thing. That's more. I find it comical almost, you know, to tell my friends.
Sure.
The Beatles called my house and said MPL on the phone.
Right.
How cool.
Honey, Paul McCartney's on the phone. Yeah, right.
And you know, we had a bad connection about 15 minutes into the interview, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you know, it was like really echoey all of a sudden. He was in England, and you don't know what to do. You know, do I stop him and say, Paul, I can't hear you?
Right.
And, you know, or do I let it go? But if I let it go, I know I can't air it.
Right.
So I'm like, Paul, I can't hear you. It's really bad. Can you call me back?
Right. Yeah.
Like, and, you know, anybody else, you know, he's just the nicest guy. Oh, yeah, sure, we'll call you right back, Chris, yeah.
Right.
You know, and that's his thing, you know.
Right.
I mean, he's been doing that since the Germany days, you know, and the Cavern Club days. Paul was the guy that would talk to the club owner. Paul would be the guy that would talk to the bouncer and the coat girl.
Right.
You know, why George and John were over at the bar being sarcastic, you know. Paul was the guy, and that's him now, you know. He's Mr. Friendly. He'll give you he'll give you a good 10, 15 minutes of full attention. Then he'll move on and do it to somebody else, you know.
Yeah.
But he's really good at that, and so is Ringo for that matter, you know. These guys don't have to do what they're doing at this age, you know. I mean, this guy's putting on 3-hour shows.
I know.
You know, people's like, he's all the money in the world, all the fame. Why do that? And the answer is they love it, you know.
Yep.
They just, you know, sitting reading a book in your house must be really boring for Paul McCartney.
I would think it is.
You know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I mean, imagine everywhere you walked, right? Everybody was like, hey, I know you from your podcast. Hey, you know, everybody knows you everywhere you go. It would be fun. Right. You wouldn't want to stay home.
No, I wouldn't think so. And I mean, I think it's obvious that both Ringo and Paul both really like what they do. I just think they do. So I mean, it's not, you know. Yeah, I mean... Yeah,
Ringo's the same way, to a lesser extent than Paul. You know, he does everything on a slightly smaller level than Paul. You know, he'll still do the tours, but he's not at the Enormo Dome, you know.
Sure.
He's, but yeah, he's the same way.
Right.
And he's doing great with his whole peace and love thing, you know.
Absolutely. Yep, and he's still doing it.
It's another way to really get out there with the fans. So,
absolutely. You know. Yep. Now, you know, you've had access, I imagine, to, like you were saying, you play different versions of things on your show and that kind of thing. You know, and in your opinion, is there more Beatles stuff that you know of in the archives that we as fans, you know, should be getting at some point? I mean, we got the White Album, you know.
I hate to say this. People always, you know, you get confused sometimes because you see all these bootlegs out there and you see these, you know, never ending. But if you really think about it, Tony, these guys had a very limited time when they were in the studio, especially the way that when they were, you know, pre-Sgt. Pepper. So they would go in and they would work on an album like Rubber Soul or, you know, for like 3 or 4 weeks. That was it. So to think that there's this never-ending, you know, amount of unreleased gems from the Beatles is really not the case. I mean, if you literally go album by album, you know, picking like Rubber Soul, there's only so much stuff there. There's not like 12 versions of Girl that we never heard, you know. There's 2 or 3 takes, and that's it. And when they spent more time on things like Sgt. Pepper and Abbey Road, yeah, there was a little bit more to pick from. And we've got these box sets that have come out recently with the 50th anniversary. And like I said, the albums that they spent time on, it wasn't a 3-week in and out thing. That's when they put the box sets out because they do have all this extra cool stuff.
Right.
And, you know, 50th anniversary of Abbey Road is coming, and we can probably expect a box set.
I think so. I think that's what I'm hearing on the horizon is a box set of some kind.
Yeah,
so.
It's very good. And it's all remixed again. I got to hear it, and it's amazing. And this time around, you're going to get a real noticeable sonic difference. In other words, when they gave you, you know, the White Album and the Pepper remixes, they were still on 4-track. They were still kind of limited, you know, to what they can do to expand the sound. But Abbey Road, as you know, that it was an amazing sounding record because for the first time they had this new gear and expansive way of recording. So now this 50th anniversary is really going to be a noticeable change, sonically.
Right. Yeah. Can't wait. I mean, as a Beatles fan, it just seems like you wait on this stuff and you're like, woohoo! All right, more
and then
stuff.
You got the Let It Be movie next year,
right?
The 50th anniversary that that guy Peter Jackson is working on,
right?
And apparently he knows what he's doing with the film, so
right.
We'll see.
Yeah. No, I mean that's good. I mean it's I have a copy on beta, so that was.
Hey, they made the Let It Be movie on Laserdisc.
Yes.
Remember Laserdisc?
Yes.
And people forget that, and that's where all the the versions like that come out. Like if you wanted to go get Let It Be on eBay, you can find it, on DVD.
Right.
Because they made them off of the Laserdisc.
With the Laserdisc, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
They were big, goofy, giant CDs.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, well, that's cool. So you not only host the Beatles show on Sirius, but you also do like another show where you just do British Invasion kind of stuff. Is that right?
Yeah. Originally I had Breakfast with the Beatles in Little Steven's underground garage, and then there was some kind of big 60s lawsuit that went on with Flo and Eddie and Sirius XM and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And that, for whatever reason, ended Breakfast with the Beatles because basically the deal is on Sirius XM, on satellite radio, you can only play 3 songs from the same artist in a 3-hour period and all these rules that they have.
Right,
So couldn't go out and play 50 Beatles songs anymore.
Right.
So Steven decided he wanted to keep me on, so he created a show called Chris Carter's British Invasion for me to do. And basically that is, like, in a nutshell, 60% real British invasion, 64 to 67 British music. And then I play, stuff from the 70s, so I play T-Rex and David Bowie and Mott the Hoople and Slade and Roxy Music and Sweet and all that kind of stuff. And then I play Britpop, Blur and Oasis and Pulp and all that kind of stuff. And I mix it all in, but it's, it's a melange of British rock and roll.
Gotcha.
From different eras. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Fun.
Okay, cool. So you're
and
not
that's 4 hours on the weekend.
Nice. My goodness. So yeah, busy kind of thing. So and so it's not just the 60s original British Invasion stuff.
No, so I'll play like the Kinks, and then the Small Faces, and then I'll play the Jam.
Nice.
And then I'll play, I might play an Oasis song. And, I'll mix it all up. It's got to be kind of fast. It's all got to be really British, and it's got to be good.
Nice.
So that's the rules.
Nice. Cool. So now tell me briefly, you owned a record store at one point called Looney Tunez.
Looney Tunez Records, yes, in lovely Wayne, New Jersey, which is where I grew up, which is North Jersey, Sopranos territory, if you will.
Right.
We were the home of the Uncle Floyd TV show. Uncle Floyd was a kiddie show for adults that was in Jersey, and all the rock and rollers like the Ramones and David Johansen and Blondie would be on the show. And we were the headquarters for Uncle Floyd records and T-shirts. And it sounds weird, but people would come from all over the tri-state area to get this stuff. And we were like, we sold imports, hard-to-get records. We were like the Bleecker Bobs of New Jersey. Bleecker Bobs is a famous underground record store in New York. So, so that's what I did for, I guess, about 4 years, 78 to 82. And then the band Dramarama, which I started, formed in the basement of Looney Tunez. And we made our first record in, I think, about 84, 85 on New Rose Records. And we got played on the radio out here in California. So we moved from Jersey to L.A. and had a couple of very successful records here, and we made 6 albums, I guess. Yeah. So that was fun.
You were signed
then I made a movie called The Mayor of the Sunset Strip.
That's right, yeah.
About Rodney Bingenheimer, who is now in Little Steven's Underground Garage, a legendary DJ from K-Rock out here.
Nice.
And Rodney broke my band Dramarama, so that's why I made a movie about him, and that movie was awesome. Had everybody in the world in it. David Bowie, the Ramones, Alice Cooper, Cher, Courtney Love, yeah.
Nice. Now let me ask you real quick about Dramarama. You guys were signed to Elektra. I mean, and that was kind of, right before kind of the music business took a big sharp turn with, downloading and streaming, everything like that.
Yes.
What did you learn, if anything, from being signed to Elektra Records with Dramarama there?
What did I learn? Well, it was a good and bad experience, you know. I mean, we had made our own records in the beginning. We were very much part of the independent record scene. First, before we got signed to Elektra, we were on Chameleon, which was an independent through Capitol, through SEMA. And that was kind of cool because we could do what we wanted. And then Elektra bought Chameleon, if I recall how that went. And then, you know, when you first get signed to a label like Elektra, it's great because you can kind of get your producer who you want, you get tour support, all these great things that you might not necessarily have. But at the same time, they're looking for you to sell a lot of records because they're putting money into you. So when we used to be very happy with selling, you know, 75, 80,000, maybe 100,000 records, you know, we thought that was awesome. It was like 100,000 records.
Right.
But when you get signed to Elektra, they want you to sell 200,000 and, you know, 250,000. Or they're not going to pay for your third video, you know.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, but that was the time of videos on MTV and 120 minutes, which is more the lane we were in.
Right.
But those were, Tony, they would give you a budget from $95,000 to $100,000 for a video.
It's crazy.
For a song. Think about that, right? Your album costs like $60,000.
Right, and they give you,
and some like guy with an earring in his nose with green hair shows up. He's the director. He's been directing for 15 minutes, you know.
Right.
Oh, he's the coolest guy in town, and he wants $75,000. And you're like, and you don't know what to do. You want to be on MTV, right? So you're like, you know. And all of a sudden now you owe the label $350,000.
Right.
And you still sold 125,000 records, but it's still not enough.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I learned.
Right.
You know, we were in, like you said, it was the tail end of a weird time. It was the last bastion, you know. But the video thing kind of killed it off. If you weren't in the business to realize how expensive the videos cost, that's what killed it. That's what killed a lot of these bands, you know. It was too nuts with the videos. And now, you know, it doesn't even matter.
It doesn't even matter. Right. Exactly. So, well, that's interesting. I mean, you know, have you ever thought about writing a book? Because you certainly have enough topics to cover in something like that.
Oh, you know, I was going to write a Beatles book because if I was smart, I would do that because I could I mean, think about it. When a guy writes a book, right, they put you on a little book tour.
Right.
And you do like 3 weeks of a book tour, right? You go on different radio stations, and then you go home, and your book just sits there. If you have a radio show and you talk to millions of people every day, and you have a book, that book can be a big seller because you're advertising.
Sure.
You can advertise for. I mean, that's when these guys like, you know, from Fox, like Bill O'Reilly, and his book is #1 for 9 years. Like, well, how does that happen? How does that guy have it?
Because he's talking about it.
On TV. He was on TV every day, plugging his book.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's how come.
No brainer.
Right. That's why all these people on TV have the #1 book.
Right.
You know, because they're hosts.
It's kind of not fair. But that's all right.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, if I had a book every day, I would say, "Don't forget my book."
Don't forget my book. Right. 100%.
I mean, I have a couple million people every day.
Right. Sure.
I mean, if 10% or you'd be rich.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. So no book, but I understand. I mean, are you like kind of going to do some speaking engagements kind of thing?
Well, you know, someone even asked me the other day, why don't you do a podcast? It's like speaking engagements, podcast. This is what I'm doing every day is I'm speaking on the radio. I have this great opportunity. So I really don't have time or really the need to do anything else. I have this wonderful little megaphone every morning.
Right.
And the good thing about the Beatles channel, opposed to, say, just being on a regular station where people come and go, the Beatles channel, that's appointment listening, as they say in radio.
Sure.
So you got people that want to listen to the Beatles. You know, I want to listen to the Beatles, and they're there. So you have this built-in audience that already loves what you're doing.
Right, sure.
They already like the band, unless you're like really obnoxious and annoying, you know, that they wouldn't want to listen to you. You know, it's a nice setup, you know, as long as you're friendly and polite, informative and funny, you got a built-in audience.
Right,
You
absolutely.
couldn't ask for more, you know, and they're good people, you know, Beatle fans are the best. They're a little geeky sometimes, but they're okay. Any fan, you pick the band. You can pick the band. Pick the coolest band in the world. Their fans are geeks. They're always that way.
Right.
Star Trek fans, you can't pick any hardcore fan that aren't a little geeky.
Right. Sure.
You know, even the coolest thing,
Right. Absolutely.
It's the way it is.
Right. Well, that's cool. So, you've been doing this 19 years and no sign of slowing down kind of thing. I mean, it's like you're...
No, I'm just going to keep going, man.
Right. Awesome. Well, good. Well, Chris, it's been great talking to you. Chris Carter is on Breakfast with the Beatles on the Beatles channel. You can catch him Monday through Friday on Sirius XM, and then he's also on the Underground Garage on the weekend as well, doing Chris Carter's British
And I do a live show on Sunday mornings on 95.5 KLOS, which is where the show originated here in Los Angeles.
Okay,
that's the eighth show.
The eighth show, right? Just like the 8 days a week, right? So,
exactly.
So, and can people stream that or something? Can they listen live?
They can. They can hear it on iHeartRadio. They can hear it on the 95.5 KLOS website, and we're just starting a brand new store, Tony, at breakfastwiththebeatles.com. In 2 days, we're going to have all sorts of great Breakfast with the Beatles T-shirts and shot glasses and cereal bowls and robes and all sorts of stuff.
I thought you were going to tell me you were going to have Breakfast with the Beatles cereal. That would be good, right?
No, that's the next thing we're going to do.
Right. That's awesome. Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure talking to you. It's always good to talk to a fellow Beatles fan. And
thanks, Tony.
You've been listening to Icon Fetch with Tony Peters. Want more great interviews? Head on over to iconfetch.com. There you'll find every interview we've ever done, plus CD reviews, This Day in Music, and a random album of the day. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Who's Tony going to interview next? It could be you. Send us what you've got to Tony Peters, Icon Fetch, P.O. Box 292134, Dayton, Ohio. Zip code 45429. Or email Tony, host@iconfetch.com. Until next time, this is Joe Kelly. Have a great day.